Hello and welcome. This week was the penultimate week before the taper starts and one of the biggest weeks in the plan, with 2 long sessions, a BAC tempo sandwich on the Wednesday and then 13 miles at marathon pace on the Sunday. Unfortunately, things didn't quite work out as planned, but more on that later. Monday was a bank holiday here in the UK, so I had planned to have a bit of a lie-in and get up later. My buddy had other ideas and I woke early anyway, so I headed out for my usual recovery. My legs felt a little tired initially, but they woke up through the run, and overall it was decent with a nice low heart rate. Unfortunately, my evening run got away from me. I was out until early evening, and by the time I got back it was getting a bit late. On top of that, I was still feeling really full from a large fish and chip supper I'd had. I therefore decided it was best to just dump the run. I didn't want to start a big busy week tiring myself out just over a recovery run. Tuesday was a lovely still morning for 12 miles along the canal. The pace was good at 7:16 per mile and I felt decent. The afternoon recovery run also felt pretty good, although it was a warm afternoon again, so I was struggling to keep the heart rate down. I really don't seem to be built for hot running. Workout Wednesday was the first of 2 BAC tempo sandwiches. This is where you run a section at marathon pace, then some intervals at around lactate threshold, and then another section at marathon pace. This time around it was 25 minutes, then 5 by 4 minutes, and then another 25 minutes. It's a hard session, but really good marathon training as you're practicing running race pace on tired legs, and it also adds up to a pretty decent length midweek long run. I ran the first marathon pace section at 6:18 per mile average. It felt nice and controlled, which was really pleasing. Then came the reps. I always wonder how I'm going to speed up so much for these, but somehow I always manage it. I averaged 5:51 per mile for these, which I was really pleased with, although it was very hard work. Then came the dreaded second tempo section. I averaged 6:21 per mile for this, so I slowed a little but not too much. This is much better than when I did this session prior to Manchester last year. Back then, the first tempo section and the intervals were pretty similar, but I slowed much more on the second tempo section, down to around 6:31 per mile. This time was much better, and I think to hold pretty close to my goal marathon pace bodes really well. Overall, the run came to 17.7 miles at an average pace of 6:37 per mile, so not a bad run. Thursday morning was pretty much perfect running conditions for me. It was cool, fairly still, and lovely and sunny, although it was a little misty along the canal. My legs were feeling a little tired from the session the previous day, but nonetheless sipped along at 7:11 per mile. The cool temperatures also helped ensure my heart rate stayed nice and low. The afternoon recovery was pretty unremarkable. The legs felt fine, the heart rate was fine, the pace was fine, it was fine. Friday morning was time for the usual medium long run. I started out well and was feeling pretty decent, certainly a lot better than last week when I struggled a bit, especially in the first half. However, about 6 miles in, disaster struck when I had an argument with a curb and lost. I went flying and landed pretty heavily on a gritty tarmac path. I had nasty grazes on my palms, my elbow, and most worryingly my knee. I almost kept going in the rush of adrenaline, but thankfully common sense prevailed and I stopped. I got a lift home and had the most painful bath of my life as I tried to soak and clean the various wounds. I then sat with my feet up for the rest of the day, growing more and more dejected as the swelling in my knee increased and I was reduced to hobbling around the flat like an old little man. I had a pretty depressing weekend worrying about how much this knee injury might impact me. I felt so frustrated, not only because I was missing out on the Kenilworth Half Marathon, which was supposed to be one of my big sessions, but because I was genuinely worried that this might write off any hopes I had of running a good time at Berlin. And all because I didn't run up a curb properly. What an idiot. However, on the Sunday the swelling did begin to die down a little. I took my nephew out to a farm park and the gentle wandering around seemed to help matters, although any steps were a bit of a palaver. I gradually came round to the idea that maybe things weren't quite as catastrophic as they initially seemed. By the time Monday morning rolled round, the knee seemed back to normal swelling wise, and other than some tightness and soreness from the wound, it felt okay. so I tentatively headed out for a test run to see where I was at. Pleasingly, the knee felt pretty good, and it actually improved through the run as the tightness from the wound eased off. My pace was slower than it has been, and the heart rate was a bit elevated, but the main thing is that I was out there running. Having been worried that I might be taken out for some time, I'm cautiously optimistic that I might be able to get back to normal training this week. It's still incredibly frustrating to have my training disrupted like this. I was on course for my biggest ever month in August, and missing Sunday leaves me with some difficult decisions about how I approach my final few weeks of training. However, I think I have to count my blessings that the injury wasn't far worse. I could have really banged up the knee or even broken a bone, and that would have completely derailed Berlin. Fingers crossed I can get back to things now, and this was just a minor blip. In theory, you'd think a few days rest might do me good, but it certainly doesn't feel like it at the moment. As usual, whenever I take more than a day off, my heart rate is elevated for a given effort level. I think if there was a world record for losing fitness quickly, I'd hold it. However, it was only a few days off, so hopefully as I continue to heal and as I pick back up training, things will settle down. This always happens to me, so I need to expect it, but it's always a bit depressing feeling like you've suddenly taken a big step back after running so well. I've tentatively earmarked Chippenham Half on Sunday as a possible replacement for Kenilworth, although I'll wait to see how this week pans out before I make any firm decisions. I'm a little wary of trying to pack in too much in too short a period. I also have the second BAC tempo sandwich next week. However, I am considerably more rested than I would have been due to those forced days off. We'll see how things pan out, but the main thing is the decision is mine to make and it's not taken out of my hands due to an injury. Let's hope I can avoid any more curbs for the next 4 weeks, hey? Cheers.